Thousands have marched through Burkina Faso's capital for a second day in opposition to President Blaise Compaore's intention to seek re-election by changing the country's constitution. Although the amendment has now been cancelled, according to state sources, protesters stormed state TV offices and parliament, setting it alight. 3 people are reported to have been shot dead.
Il nous faudra continuer de nous battre, camarades, résolument pour la liberté et la démocratie véritable, en nous fondant davantage sur les aspirations profondes de notre peuple.
President Compaore came to power in a coup in 1987 and has since won 4 presidential elections, the maximum allowed. Close allies France and the USA have expressed concern with the move, galvanizing demonstrators and President Compaore's political opponents.
Well, with me to discuss that last story in the studio is Paul Melly, Associate Fellow at the Africa Programme in Chatham House. Paul, Parliament being stormed, TV stations being stormed. How deep a revolution is this?
Well, I think the important thing is the context. This is West Africa, where most countries now are democracies. The norm is that people do 2 or 3 terms up to the constitutional limit and then quit. The last person to try and change the rules, President Wade in Senegal, successfully changed the constitution, but that was then hammered in the subsequent election, which showed what voters thought of this measure. In Compaore's case, he's been in power for 27 years. So by the standards of modern West Africa today, that's a very, very long period. It's not normal anymore in the west of Africa for regimes to hang on in that manner.
And those elections that he won, were they free and fair elections?
Reasonably in more recent times. I mean, basically, when he first started out, he was an authoritarian ruler. Then in the early 90s, a lot of the region moved towards multi-party politics. But the degree to which that was properly democratic varied from country to country. In some countries, such as Ghana, for example, it was very democratic, or Benin. In others, the democracy was a bit more of a facade. But gradually, democratic institutions have grown stronger across the region, and ECOWAS, the regional bloc, is committed to constitutional democracy and the right for people to change governments. And it looks as if Blaise Compaore has, as it were, pushed people's tolerance too far. They would have been content to see him quietly retire next year when the presidential election is due, and by trying to change the rules so he can run for 1 more term, or possibly, depending on how they're interpreted, 3 more, that's just broken the straw that's broken the camel's back, if you like.
So is it, we understand now that that kind of play has been withdrawn. Is that going to be enough, or will he have to go now?
Well, that's what we don't know. As of this afternoon, senior army commanders are in negotiation in Ouagadougou, the capital, seemingly between him and his inner circle and the opposition, and a UN envoy is expected to arrive soon as well to try and negotiate some sort of way out. In theory, in law, he would have the option of trying to organize a referendum to change the constitution, but after the upheavals of the last day or 2 and the momentum that's with the opposition and protest, that would look a pretty high-risk option. And it may be he'll be trying to just negotiate a secure way out.
So the opposition, how deep is it, and who are they?
Well, the opposition are a series of parties that have evolved over recent years, but some led by people who used to be in the government. It isn't, if you like, an ideological opposition in the traditional left-right sense. We don't, as you would have in the Arab world, very often a contrast between an Islamic opposition and a secular one, as we've seen in that news report from Tunisia a few minutes ago. In Burkina Faso, it's really just a question of a newer generation of people, who are not really associated with the early days of Blaise Compaore's regime, who might come to the fore. At this stage, people are less worried about who might the alternative president be. There are probably several capable, competent people who could fill the job. It's more a feeling among ordinary Burkinabe that in a region where democratic choice is now the norm, they should feel able to make those choices as well, because people in most of the surrounding countries are doing so.
So what would be needed here really is at least for a secure and more stable democratic settlement to emerge from this conflict. Is there any economic or social component in the protest that's wider than that?
Yes, there is an economic component because in recent years Burkina Faso has enjoyed a boom in the mining industry. It's got important gold reserves and manganese and other resources. And there's a feeling among ordinary people that the benefits have not been shared very widely, that people in the elite, in circles close to power, have done rather well, and yet the full benefits of the mining boom have not been felt in basic services. And that matters because Burkina Faso used to have a very strong tradition of effective grassroots development and poverty reduction. And this is the Sahel. It's the edge of the Sahara. It's a region where people's livelihoods are very fragile. People in the villages, typically you may get just 2 or 3 months of rain a year. And in that sort of fragile situation, if government is seen to fall short in terms of really delivering benefits for people in the villages and creating jobs for the urban masses, young, educated urban people who haven't got jobs at the moment, then that creates a lot of discontent.
So do you think that element might come to predominate and therefore push the revolt into a more serious and deep-rooted social phenomenon than perhaps it is at the moment when we're talking about it kind of correcting a sort of undemocratic swerve on the part of the president?
I think you might get that, but I think on the whole, the trend in West Africa at the moment is people are very well aware of what's going on in neighbouring countries. And they don't have huge illusions that tomorrow everything will be okay. There's been a very gradual process of economic progress and recovery from the really disastrous period of the late 80s, early mid-90s. But people want to see that progress is continuing. They're prepared to be patient if they think government is effective and is delivering results. And we can see in other neighbouring countries, for example, in Niger or in Ghana, in Benin, in Senegal, there's quite a strong sort of belief that gradualist progress can be sustained and people will then back the political system. But they do expect a degree of consent. There's quite a lot of sort of personality in these issues. People want to say.
OK. Paul Melly from Chatham House, thanks very much for that. Now it's time to go on to our feature story of the night.